Just balance, friend. You were just balancing. Okay. We're gonna do this in one take because you're precariously perched on a bench in this hotel room right now. So let's try to get this done as quickly as possible before my phone falls off of this thing. Hello everyone. Welcome back to my channel, or welcome to my channel if you're new. My name is Kristen, and this is not my house, as you may have already guessed. I am in a hotel right now for fun things, fun reasons. I am going to see Taylor Swift tomorrow. Yes, 2006 Kristen is very excited, as is 2023 Kristen. My hair is really fluffy. I just bleached it today, so that's what's going on here. Also not wearing any makeup, and I feel like you can see all of my freckles in this lighting. Yeah, let me just give you a little bit of a close-up in case you can't see them well enough. They're really out here today. They're making themselves known. They are present and accounted for. So they're gonna be our little guest stars this week. In this week's video, because today is Friday, March 31st, we're going to talk about the books that I read in March. So this month didn't really read as many books as I wanted, and that's okay. I was very busy, very preoccupied this month, so not entirely surprising that I did not finish all of the books that I wanted to, especially because a good chunk of the ones that I wanted to read this month were physical books and just didn't have a lot of time to sit down and read, especially not this last week. There's a lot of sirens going on. Can I see them? Not close enough for me to see, just close enough to hear. Let me pull up my stats for the month of March. So I only read 5 books this month, so not a ton, but still averaging more than one a week, which is great. I will take that, especially with how busy I've been recently and how not really in the mood for reading I've been. I feel like that's still a big accomplishment with the way that I've been feeling about sitting down and reading recently. I'm currently reading 3 more books right now. I'm a couple hours into another audiobook, and then I'm about like 50 pages into 2 other books. So there were 8 books started this month, just not 8 finished. I'm gonna put the stats up somewhere up here while I'm reading them. I read 333 pages and listened to 39.75 hours. The moods of the books that I read were tense, dark, mysterious, lighthearted, and funny. I feel like that's about par for the course. I'm generally really drawn to books that are really tense and dark and mysterious, so that makes sense. I feel like the lighthearted and funny probably comes from the one romance that I finished this month. That was a rollover from February, so that's probably the only reason those stats are there. Moving on, the average rating that I gave books this month was a 3.75. It was pretty spread across the board. I had books ranging from 3 stars to 4.25 stars. So a bit of a spread there, but nothing crazy. 20% of the books that I read this month were physical books, and 80% of the books that I read were audiobooks. If you do the math, that means that I read 1 physical book this month, which was the romance that was a rollover from February. And lastly, the genre breakdown. So 4 of the books that I read this month fell into the mystery/thriller category, and I had 1 book that was a romance, 1 book that was considered horror, and 1 book that was considered contemporary. These are not my genre picks. That's what Storygraph has them labeled as. And then this is just a little breakdown of how many minutes I listened to throughout the month each day, and how many pages I read throughout the month each day. So I'm just gonna put that up there for you. I'm not gonna try to talk you through it. You can pause it and look at it if you want, but these are all just data points for nerds, if you will. I haven't really taken a dive into any of my reading stats in these kind of videos, so I find the stats really interesting. It's one of the reasons why I really like Storygraph, because they give you a lot more statistics about your reading habits than Goodreads does. So if this is something that you also like hearing about, let me know, and I can include more of it in my future wrap-up videos. With that all out of the way, let's actually get into the meat of this video, which is the books that I read and what I rated them. We're gonna start with the books that I rated 3 stars and work our way up to the books that I rated 4.25. The book that I rated 3 stars this month was Perfect Days. So Perfect Days had a really interesting concept. I really wanted to like this book a lot. The book surrounds a Brazilian medical student named Teo who becomes obsessed with and then ends up kidnapping a girl that he is obsessed with named Clarice. He then takes her on this terrifying road trip throughout Brazil and essentially is trying to get her to fall in love with him, but in doing so ends up maiming her, killing people that she loves, and all of that stuff that generally does not result in someone actually loving you. But clearly, Teo is not right in the noggin. He has some issues going on that clearly keep him from thinking rationally. So you can tell how this concept could be a very compelling thriller premise. I was very excited to read it. I was really into it for most of the audiobook, but I did not like the ending at all. So the whole book is told through Teo's perspective. We get his inner monologue, all of the creepy things that he is thinking about Clarice, and all of his weird logic into why he's doing the things he's doing and how he thinks it's going to make her fall in love with him in the end. Which I will admit, it's very interesting, very creepy. I was really into that. The main problems I had with this book had to do with how Clarice as a character was written and the choices that she made towards the end. We're about to get a little gory, so little trigger warning there. If you're a little squeamish, maybe skip ahead a minute or two. I put chapters in, skip ahead to the next chapter. Go ahead, you're not missing much. So throughout the entirety of the first part of the book, she seems to be this very feisty, self-sufficient, independent kind of girl who can take care of herself and is willing to fight for her freedom. However, when she gets the opportunity to actually fight for her freedom, she ends up having a bit of a breakdown when she realizes that Teo has killed people that she loves and throws herself in the sea in an attempt to end her own life. However, you can't get away that easily from a person like Teo. So he ends up saving her, and because she's been so defiant, he ends up cutting her spinal cord so that she can no longer use her legs and is completely reliant on him from there out. She does try to fight back one more time when she wakes up in the car when they're on the road, and she essentially grabs him and holds him to where he can't steer anymore, and they end up driving off a cliff. Neither of them die in the car crash, and they both end up in the hospital, and Clarice ends up in a coma. Once she wakes up from that coma, she conveniently has amnesia and does not remember who Teo is or any of the events that transpired in the last few months. So it makes it a very easy and convenient way for Teo to stay in her life and get her to fall in love with him for real. And what I don't like about it is the killer gets a happy ending. I don't like that. I don't like that he just gets to have everything that he wanted. I also don't like that there is no justice, really, in the book. He just gets exactly what he wants. He marries Clarice and they live together. He becomes a full-fledged doctor. He finishes medical school. She goes back to school, gets her degree. She ends up pregnant, and that's how the story ends. There is a little bit of a little hint that she might be regaining some of her memories at the very end. But even then, I wasn't satisfied with the ending at all. I didn't like it. And it really brought the rating of the book down for me. Before the ending, about halfway through, it was sitting at closer to a 4 for me. But the way that it ended, I really did not like. It just made that rating plummet for me. This is the book that I rated the lowest in the month of March. And I feel like it kind of put me in a bit of a reading slump, I'm not gonna lie. It really didn't feel like reading much after that, which is sad, but I did end up reading 4 more books after that. So it wasn't terrible. It just was quite disappointing in the way that it ended, and I wasn't a huge fan of it. Alrighty, moving on. The next book on my list is All the Missing Girls. So this book is about a small town in, I believe it's Tennessee. It's a small town in the Smoky Mountains. I want to say it's in Tennessee, but I could be wrong. It's somewhere in that area though. And it centers around our main character, Nicolette, who grew up in this small town and left the city after her best friend passed away when she was 18 and has not really been back since. It is now 10 years later. She is now 28. She's finished school. She is a counselor and she lives in Philadelphia and is engaged to a lawyer. So she seemingly has a really good life. She has, for all intents and purposes, seems like she has dealt with her past and put it behind her until she has to go back to her hometown, which is called Cooley Ridge, and help her brother sort her ailing father's affairs. He has started to develop memory issues. I don't know if they explicitly call it dementia or Alzheimer's, but he has issues with his memory and is therefore placed in a care home for the time being, while Nicolette and her brother sort through his house and get it ready to sell so that they can put the money towards his care. Once she comes back to town, she quickly realizes that there are a lot of unresolved things that she has just left behind in Cooley Ridge. And this becomes more apparent when another girl goes missing in the same town in a similar fashion to the way that her friend did 10 years earlier. So this was a pretty good thriller. I really enjoyed how the story unfolded itself. My main issue with this book is the way that the story was told. It's told in this weird reverse chronological order. Not only are you going through the events of the more recent disappearance of Annalise, but there's also chapters mixed in that are flashbacks from 10 years earlier when Nicolette's best friend, Corinne, went missing. And it's kind of hard to keep it straight in your head. There are distinct, chapter markers that say 10 years earlier or day 12. You know that that's 12 days since Annalise has disappeared, but it just kind of added to the confusion. But when you put the more recent events in reverse chronological order, it just kind of adds to the confusion, and not in a good way. So because of the way it's told, you meet Annalise and you get to know the main characters that are going to be present throughout the story. And then you all of a sudden jump 2 weeks into the future, and it's kind of just discombobulating. You don't really understand what's happening, and you don't understand why, because you don't have the context of the 2 weeks in between. As it walks back day by day, it doesn't really get much clearer, because all you get are more of those events that, without the context, are just confusing. And I don't think that the reveals of the things that are happening with the context, I don't think it really adds to the experience. I think that the story would have been so much better if it was just told chronologically and then had the flashbacks peppered in throughout. I think that that's a much better way of structuring a story like this, rather than have the flashbacks as well as the main story being told in reverse. I feel like that's too much jumping back and forth in time, and it just created a confusing read for me. Other people may not have had that experience, and if they didn't, they probably enjoyed this book a lot because the story itself was really interesting. I did really enjoy it. I just had to pause it a couple times and sit there and try to think through what was happening. It kind of got to the point where certain things I wasn't sure if I didn't know what was going on because I missed it and I wasn't paying attention for some reason, or I wasn't supposed to know about it yet, and it was a reveal to come later on. And I feel like it just didn't work for me. But I am currently reading another book by this author that I think is told in a better way. So we'll see how that one goes. But this one I gave 3.5 stars. Pretty much just because I wasn't really a fan of the way the story itself was told. Okay. Moving on to the 4-star range. So there were 2 books in the month of April that I ended up rating 4 stars. The first one was Love on the Brain, which was our last romance rollover from February. This is also the one physical book that I finished this month. And it took me a while to finish it. I'm not gonna lie. It took me way longer than it should have to read the last 40 pages. And that's not for any reason other than I just didn't have the motivation to sit down and read after I finished Perfect Days. That book really took a toll on my motivation to read. So this book overall, I really enjoyed it. I thought it was super cute. I really liked the main characters. Levi and Bee are adorable. Love them so much. I also really enjoyed the discourse in this book surrounding the graduate admissions process and the GRE specifically. Not to get all up on my soapbox or anything, but I'm a person who has gone to grad school outside of the US because of the GRE. I know myself, and I know that I am a bad standardized test taker. I get very stressed out, very anxious, and I make stupid mistakes because of that. It's not that I'm not smart. It's not that I'm not good enough for grad school. It's the stress of a hours-long standardized test that just gets to me and makes me not perform as well as I could. And because of that, I really vibed with the research assistant in this book, whose name is Rocio, not only because she is dealing with the GRE and graduate applications and stuff like that, but also I just love her attitude. I think she's so funny. She's like a little dark goth girl. And the things that she says are just so funny, and I just really liked her as a character. I thought she was so fun. Specifically, one of my favorite parts with her is there's a part at the end of the book where one of the characters says, "I'm begging you on my knees," and she just looks at them and says, "You're standing up." you're not on your knees. People look at her like, he's not being literal. And she's like, he said he'd beg on his knees. He's not on his knees. And I just thought that was so funny, and I loved it. I thought it was great. The thing about this book that I wasn't a huge fan of was the ending, because it just kind of like came out of left field. Like, did not expect it, did not think that's what the conflict was going to be like, but it was, and it was very dramatic for no good reason, honestly. The big conflict towards the end is essentially B being held at gunpoint and being told, you're either going to jump off the top of the building or I'm going to shoot you. Take your pick. And she really considers jumping off the building. Like, this is going to be a little side note, but me personally, if I'm ever in a situation like that and someone is holding a gun to me and saying, you're either going to jump off this building and make your death look like a suicide, or I'm going to shoot you. Shoot me. Do it. Please do it. Deal with getting rid of my dead body and covering up a murder, please. Like, I'm not going to give you the out of killing myself. Like, absolutely not. That's going to make it way too easy for you. I want you to have to cover up a crime scene. If I'm going to lose my life because of this, I'm going to make it as difficult as possible for you. There's no way I'm making it any easier for you. I'm going to smear my blood everywhere. I'm going to touch everything. I'm going to scratch you. I'm going to do everything I can to make it as difficult as possible for you. There's absolutely no way I'm making it easy for you. So I just never understand when that's like a plot point that's used. Like, no, it never makes sense to me. And so that being how the big conflict in this book is, really just made me go like, but why? Like, why? There are so many other ways that this conflict could have like come to a head, but you chose a gun? Really? The math ain't mathin' on that one. And honestly, I think it was sitting at like a 4.5 before I got to the last 40 pages and got to that ending. So it really drug it down for me because of that, because it just didn't really jive with what else was going on in the book, and it kind of came out of nowhere. And also, that plot point never makes sense to me. So all of those things made me knock it down from like a 4.5 to just a 4. Other than the ending though, I really liked this book. I would definitely read it again. It's super cute, super quirky. They're both like super nerdy, and it's really cute. So I would definitely read it again, but the ending was just not my cup of tea at all. It was a twist, but not in like a good thriller kind of way. The other book I rated 4 stars this month was Rock, Paper, Scissors. So Rock, Paper, Scissors centers around a husband and wife, Amelia and Adam. Amelia wins a free trip up to Scotland to stay in this converted chapel. As they arrive, there is a big storm that rolls in that essentially buries their car in snow, snows them into the chapel, where they quickly start to realize that there is something off about this chapel and the people who own it. There's a big plot point surrounding Adam himself, who suffers from face blindness. I don't remember what the actual medical term is called, but essentially it's where you cannot recognize faces. From what I understand from the book, what he suffers from is essentially him not being able to recognize people's faces. Like, he doesn't recognize distinct facial features, so therefore he can't really like recognize his wife in a room if he's meeting her for dinner. He doesn't recognize people that he's met before. He doesn't recognize faces of people. He can recognize voices if they have distinct clothing or accessories that they wear, distinct hairstyles. He can recognize them by those things, but he cannot recognize them by their face alone. And this becomes a major plot point in this book and has a lot to do with the twist at the end. The chapters in the chapel where they're staying for this weekend away are mixed in with chapters that are essentially letters that his wife has written him every year on their anniversary. So every year on their anniversary, she writes him a secret letter that is an honest account of how their marriage went the previous year, and she keeps them. She has no intention of letting him read them. As you would expect at first, they're really sweet, filled with like that newlywed bliss kind of thing. And then as they have more marital problems and more life struggles, they start to taper off towards the end. And then the twist comes in. I don't want to give it away because it was a big like dawning moment for me, and I don't want to take that away from anyone else who has any intent of reading this book, but I'm just gonna say it's a really good twist. There is a lot in this book about marriages and relationships and friendships and the breakdown of different relationships, whether that be a familial relationship or a romantic one or a relationship with a friend. There's so many different relationships that break down within this book. It's a really interesting and good read. The only reason why I rated it 4 stars was because I wasn't as invested in this story as I was with Daisy Darker, the other Alice Feeney book that I have read. And I do think that Daisy Darker for me was a slightly better book, but overall I really enjoyed Rock, Paper, Scissors. The ending was a little weird for me because after the big conflict, they just kind of go back to normal, and I don't know. I just feel like there should have been more fanfare with the end. So the ending was a little unfulfilling, I guess. So that in combination with me comparing it to other works of hers that I have read made me rate it 4 stars. But I still think it's a really solid thriller, and I would recommend it to other people. Alrighty. And the last book on this list that I rated 4.25 stars was What Lies Between Us. So this is a book that I remember talking about in my March TBR, and I remember being like, I don't really understand what it's about. I really want to know what Maggie did for Nina to tie her up in the attic and think that that's a logical thing to do. I found out exactly what Maggie did, and I found out exactly what Nina did. Oh my God. Those two women, good Lord. Good Lord. Did I mention that they're mother and daughter? Yeah. Maggie is Nina's mom. So that just added even more of a confused layer when I started reading this book, knowing that Maggie is Nina's mother and she's chained up in the attic. This book was so interesting, and I gave it a 4.25 just because I feel like there could have been more done with it, but overall it was really interesting. I was invested pretty much from the get-go. I mean, who wouldn't be, honestly? The premise of this book is that Maggie and Nina live together in a house in England, and they have dinner together twice a week. And on those days, Nina swipes out Maggie's short chain that is keeping her confined to the attic and swaps it out for a longer one that allows her to roam around the house so that she can come downstairs and have dinner with Nina. And Nina has decided that because of everything that Maggie has done to her, she deserves to be locked up in the attic and never to leave the house again. And I think that's essentially all of the background that I had going into this book. And I feel like that is a good amount of information to have because this book is a lot. It is twisty and turny, and there is a lot that goes on within that house over the 25 years that this book spans. And once again, I don't really want to give away any of it, but all I'll say is neither of them are great. Neither of them are great people. Yeah, they're both pretty terrible people, and the story was it was like 0 to 100 from start to finish. It just it took off, and it did not stop until the end. As the story went on and you got to know more about Nina and Maggie's history, things started to make a lot more sense. And it has a bit of dramatic irony to it as well, because Nina's point of view of what has happened in the past is not completely accurate and does not align with Maggie's view of what has happened in the past. And because of how Nina is, because she doesn't trust her mother, she also does not believe Maggie when she tells her what actually happened in the past. Doesn't actually believe her when she tells her how events actually transpired in the past. There is a line that Maggie says in the book where she essentially says, once Nina has made her mind up about something, you cannot change it. And that's definitely a true statement from the story I read. So there are parts of it that do get quite brutal in the descriptions of the things that happen to different people. So go in knowing that there's a little bit of body gore going on in this book, but it's not a ton, and it really does add to the creepy atmosphere of the story and the horror surrounding this. I think that this is probably the one that was lumped in with the horrors because it does have some horror elements to it in the different things that happen to these characters in the book. Overall, I would definitely recommend this book. This is one that I just kind of happened upon on one of my audiobook apps and decided to add it into my March TBR because it looked interesting, the description sounded interesting, and I was not disappointed, that's for sure. So I would definitely recommend this one. It's not my favorite thriller, but it is the best thriller that I've read this month, closely followed by Rock, Paper, Scissors. But those two are probably my top 2 that I read in March. And that brings us to the end of my March wrap up. Thank you so much for being here with me today. I really appreciate it. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, please leave a like down below. Let me know. And subscribe while you're down there so you get notified of when I upload more videos talking about the books that I read. I hope you guys have a wonderful day wherever you are in the world. Thank you so much once again for joining me today, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye!